This video has been published on the 28th of August, 2025. This date, one day before we say goodbye to Jason to be replaced by none other than Slasher, an official redesign and reimagining of the character. Along with these, we could also be expecting some balance and gameplay changes to potentially fix this character, who was well known for being a powerhouse upon the game's release way back in December of 2024, but has slowly and painfully dropped down to become famously known as the worst killer in Forsaken today. This shorter but special video goes over the entire history of Jason, published on our last standing evening with Jason to fully remember what he has gone through and how he's ended up in such a horrible spot. Enjoy the video. Jason is typically regarded as the worst killer to exist in Forsaken today, but of course he too is part of the original 4 killers and notably the actual most overpowered on release. While his slash and gashing wound remained relatively the same, Behead did a horrific 60 or so damage and inflicted way more helpless and raging pace. It was an absolute mess. The state of the game, such as the horrific map design, made his environment impossible to thrive in, yet this version of Jason still had the best stats possessed by any killer. And as I go through the history, you might just notice his downfall really didn't relate to balance changes at all, but instead the evolution of the game environment and survivor adaptation to Forsaken. So yeah, as I said, Jason on release was disgustingly powerful despite the state of the game. This was the era where killers still lost stamina even when far from survivors, and when looping spots like this existed. It tore up Jason pretty bad, but luckily Raging Pace worked way differently at this time. Your stamina would literally only increase when using it, no cap for it to start draining. This was really good purely to catch up to survivors with full stamina. The crater in the planet Voss was impenetrable due to survivors being able to see you the entire time. York's was also a problem, but not nearly as notable. Behead was also disgustingly good compared to today, dealing way more damage and inflicting way more helpless. This could deal about half health from a single hit, and for some support characters could kill them in literally 2 goes. Very soon after game release though, the devs caught onto this and nerfed the helpless length in a patch. And the bouncing just continued. January was absolutely chaotic, constantly changing Jason, just not being able to figure out where his character fit right. Along with a basically impossible meta for killers, Raging Pace especially had been worked on. First, they gave him the incredibly harsh nerf of changing the stamina cap to 60 during Raging Pace. What this means is that he cannot exit this form with more than 60 stamina. If you're below it, it will rise to 60, and you're above it, it will go down to 60. The issue of this nerf is that it destroyed the tiniest chances that he had to counter how outpaced killers were at the time, with no proximity stamina drain buff, plus several overpowered sentinels at the top of the meta. A small tweak went through in Raging Pace to make it a bit more lenient on how fast the stamina will be forced down to 60, but it barely mattered. The devs had basically killed Jason and his chances of being viable at the game. Just kidding. Behead was still overpowered and they buffed the cap up to 75. Yeah, the cap being at 75 compared to the previous 110 is still harsh, but the cooldown was like 2 times longer than it is today, making it awkwardly rare for such a necessity ability. Well, they nerfed that by 7 seconds and even increased his speed during the ability. Oh, and Planet Voss removed that giant crater. It is now a perfectly flat map. Awesome, cool. And just a few weeks into the game's lifespan, and Jason had gotten 7 balance changes, but if it's needed, I suppose. Well, now he's in roughly the same spot as he was upon release, except now Raging Pace is more viable and the worst looping spot in the game is removed. At the end of January, welcome in another balance change, giving him less punishment for missing a behead, along with invincibility to stuns after gashing wound. A few weeks later in February, his overall base speed was increased, and in return, the stamina cap went from 75 to 70 for Raging Pace. One more time in March, Raging Pace's cooldown was decreased by 8 seconds. This is looking great for Jason. The worst looping spots have been removed, he's gotten buff after buff. This is perfectly shaping together for Jason and becoming a pretty solid killer, right? Okay, so Jason was a bouncing mess in the first couple months of the game. A total of 12 changes right off the bat. Well, after a quick March patch, Jason then went on to receive literally 1 change for the rest of his lifespan until today, August 28th, 2025, the day before the Slasher rework. Besides a tiny change to Behead in July, Jason was left completely alone for literally 5 entire months. And I know that sounds stupid, but keep in mind that 5 months is literally well over half of the game's total lifespan. We're not even 3/4 into a year in Forsaken yet, so this is pretty significant. So how did this very powerful killer in the early months of the game drop down to what most consider as by far the weakest killer in Forsaken? By getting 0 balance changes. Welcome, dear viewer, to a topic called looping. Ever heard of it? Well, I hope so, because I've already brought it up in this video like several times. Looping is essentially the action of running around and around a certain object or landform in Forsaken in the most efficient, corner-cutting form possible. When you lay it all out, looping is like basically running in a straight line away from them. The game was designed for this to not exactly be a possibility. You're bound to bump into walls, curve around corners awkwardly, and have killers take advantage of the moveset and the killer-only walls to somewhat have a chance of catching up with you. Looping is basically like taking the absolute most optimized path possible. It's equivalent of being an AI pathfinder who could perfectly detect the most optimized path possible to get away from the killer. The reason looping works is because it's just going around and around the same thing and over. You can't carve out the best possible path to take around the map of Forsaken to constantly distance yourself from the killer, because maps eventually end and have walls, getting yourself cornered. When you lay out the path very literally, it's quite simply just like running in a perfectly straight, infinite line. This is a huge problem, because Forsaken was not designed to have survivors take advantage of this. Think of the crater in Planet Voss. That was a gigantic looping spot. You can literally run around the crater all day long and the killer couldn't catch up to you. Maps needed to be less open, have extra paths, random shortcuts, stuff like that, which makes Cool Carnival arguably the best map structurally. But the developers know about looping and have made many steps toward removing it. The crater in Planet Voss, the house in Yorks for the most part, the rock formation in Brendan Works, the ship in Pirates Bay. All of these have arguably fixed issues here, but looping is just too easy to find. The scaffolding wall in Assassins and the castle in Brandon's Works still exist, and those are disgustingly good. Okay, you get the point. Let's tie this to Jason. Doesn't this affect like all the killers? Well, the short answer is no. Cool Kid has minions and sometimes corrupt nature. While it slows him down, it's still worth not losing an entire minute to looping. John Doe, well, this is pretty obvious. 1x even more obvious. Noli is the second most loopable killer in the game, with his only chances of fixing the debuff is Void Rush and sometimes catching up with survivors, and maybe Nova to pull him back. While not exactly reliable, it's better than Jason. He has nothing, no projectiles, summoning, and one movement ability. Raging Pace is obviously the saving grace to Jason, but exactly how effective is it at its job? Well, it does close the gap somewhat, letting you get closer to the survivor in general, but if they could just stamina manage perfectly, it will take you roughly 3 or so full Raging Paces to finally be in proximity to slash them. And this is assuming that there's no support characters to help them get away, heal them, or maybe build a sentry. This is also assuming there's no sentinels to stun you, resetting literally the entire chase. Looping is incredibly overpowered for survivors, being able to waste up to a minute assuming 0 distractions are in your presence. 1 else is a minute, basically the entirety of Last Man Standing. You probably could see the point I'm making here. Oh, but Evan, what if I play perfectly as Jason, and who says the survivors even know how to loop? Well, tie this back to what I said earlier. Jason has basically not been changed a single time for what, 5 months I said? And despite this game still being incredibly young, players evolve fast. Looping wasn't an issue that long ago. Most players didn't even know what it was and couldn't manage their stamina properly. But as the game grows older with no balance changes to said character, survivors adapt to a dangerous degree. To keep it short, players have absolutely tore this killer's playstyle apart. The developers simply haven't put enough of an effort toward removing all looping spots. The killer went from being regarded as overpowered to decent to an absolute disaster. Well, yes, it's obviously true that it still requires a very skilled player to pull off perfectly, and for that, I have 2 things to respond with. 1. Looping isn't hard. Once a player is aware of the mechanic and its locations, most of the skill goes in toward awareness and teamwork to know where the killer is at all times in case they decide to double back. And if they fail this action, however, they're back at square one. 2. Some characters are better at looping than others. Picking Shiletsky, who is incredibly powerful at this action due to being able to reset the whole progress with a single slash. Noob for the Bloxacola speed, Elliot for rush hour, you choose. You can loop better with almost anyone, but some make the process even better. In summary, looping has genuinely torn Jason apart. Players adapted to his moveset, identified counters, and took advantages of the physics and threw Jason into this horrible spot he's in today. Jason wasn't supposed to end up like this, nor never expected to be. Seeing a killer go from borderline overpowered to an absolute joke purely from the game's involvement is something insane to see, and with some copyright infringement worries upon the horizon of Forsaken's doorstep, when you're seeing this video, it is likely Jason is gone for good and Slasher has taken his spot. Will Slasher come back with balance changes and or a rework to fix all the issues I've outlined in this video? Honestly, that totally couldn't happen, but if it does, at least to give this video a cool string of lost history and Forsaken tied to it. I can see the headline now, Looping is no longer viable or something. I don't know. Whatever. This video has gone on way longer than I really wanted it to be, so I'll cut myself off here. Great thanks to these 3 lucky commenters for helping me with some info to make this video, and shout out to my channel members, Agus End, Xvoid, and Cyphercats. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a good— Okay, wait, some quick bloopers. When I was recording this last part, my dog decided to shake his head like incredibly loudly in the background, and it just sounds really funny. Looping is no longer viable or something. I don't know. Oh my god, Hobbs, why are you so